Hey everybody, welcome back to part 2 of our Day 4 outro. Instead of an intro, this is an outro. We've been looking at the article by Magretta called Why Business Models Matter. And we moved through the first part of this article pretty well. You'll see that in part 1 of our outro for today. And we were just now getting to this part about the 2 critical tests. So remember, the 2 parts of a business model that Magretta was pointing out was that they tell a story and that they tie the narrative to numbers. And so what Magretta says about business models is that when they don't work, it's because they either fail the narrative test, in other words, the story doesn't make sense, or the numbers test, meaning that the numbers don't add up when we look at them at the end. So what we want to do is we want to think about, for our own strategic plans, remember we're trying to model that in some ways on a business model, what is the story that we're telling? And the story should make sense. There should be stakeholders mentioned as our characters. The motivations for them to be involved should be there. There should be some sort of a action or something that they do that's a part of the story. And then the numbers test, there should be some way to empirically observe or measure or otherwise get information about whether or not the innovation is doing what it's supposed to be doing, whether or not it's really creating a change, it's transforming something, it's breaking a pattern, it's disrupting a system in a way that is productive and adds value, right? Okay, so that's what we want to do. A little different than business models, obviously, because we're not profit seeking, but some of those elements are the same. And when we think about what Magretta says about business models, we can think about the same thing for our social and educational entrepreneurship. A business model, he says, great strength as a planning tool is that it focuses attention on how all the elements of the system fit into a working whole. So what's interesting about this is that we're really talking about the whole thing, the working whole. There should be some sort of way that our plan gives the reader a clear understanding of why we want to do this, in other words, what the problem is, how we're going to do it, that's what the action is or the implementation, and what the outcome is and how we know that, which is our accountability model, right? We need to have that whole system to be part of our strategic plan. But what I think is great that Magretta points out is that a business model or a model of any kind isn't the same thing as a strategy. And he points this out by saying sooner or later, and it's usually sooner, every enterprise or every entrepreneurial or innovative idea runs into competitors. Dealing with that reality is strategy's job. Now, how do we think about competition from a social or educational entrepreneurship perspective? Because we're not thinking about it in the same way that you would from a business perspective. We're not usually competing with others to make our innovation, more profitable in this case, or win somehow. What we are trying to do, however, is to think about how our idea, we're back to the adding value thing, right? Creates something new, or adds value or creates value that didn't exist before, or that it does it in a way that other programs don't. So for example, there are a lot of public-private partnerships out there where schools and businesses will link together. The schools usually get resources out of it, the businesses usually get some sort of philanthropic pleasure out of it, or it meets a strategic need for their employees or something like that. Right? So usually there's a trade-off, so it's meant to be a win-win. But not every model for a public-private partnership is the same, even though we might already know kind of how they work. So if we wanted to be truly innovative about public-private partnerships, well, one, we'd have to think about all of the, quite frankly, criticisms, and justifiably so criticisms, of these public-private partnerships, inequities that exist, opportunities that exist as well, but the ways that the challenges and the opportunities are balanced. And an innovative approach would be strategic in that it would approach public-private partnerships in a way that took care of the perhaps imbalance between the challenges and the opportunities of these partnerships in a way that no other partnership had done before. All right. So that is our competitor. Our competitor is doing something unique, is being different, is actually transforming and disrupting. That's the competitor for a social or educational innovation, rather than somebody else or another program. So, what he says, and I agree with this part, when you cut away the jargon, that's what strategy is all about. How you're going to do better by being different. Right? Now, he uses a lot of business examples in here, and I'm not going over the examples. I think you should read them because I think they're interesting and they show different ways and different approaches to being to creating a strategic plan or a model for how to do something entrepreneurial. So I don't want you to lose that. That's just not what I'm talking about right now. What I do like is this idea about how are you going to do better by being different. That's really the key to your strategy. That's the key to your competition. Okay, and then I think that's it. I think that's what I have. Oh my gosh, I ended sooner than I thought. So when you're now at the end of day 4 and you're thinking about, remember, let me go back to our site. I'll find it eventually. There we are. I just shut it down. Hey, I found it. I found the page. One of the things that I think is pretty awesome about these screencasts is you kind of get to see this like a real lecture, right? Warts and all. Things don't always go as planned, and I accidentally shut down this page right in the middle of trying to find it. Anyway, we're back to day 4. And so at the end of this, again, thinking about our objectives, how to develop a strategy for educational entrepreneurship, and how to develop an operating model for social ventures in education. We can see from that Why Business Models Matter article, and I think also from all of the readings and videos from today, that the operating model and the strategy for us are integrated. And what the Magretti article does is it points out that a business model, just using that alone, doesn't necessarily mean strategy. What we're adding on to that is a layer of strategy, because we are doing something that is transformative, and we are doing something better by being different. And that part has to come through, and I think it can come through in the ways that Magretti pointed out, by telling a story and by linking the narrative to numbers. If you're telling a story the way that, quite frankly, it needs to be told, you're including in it the idea of how this innovation is transformative, how it is disruptive and pattern breaking. That will be an important part of the narrative. But tying the narrative to numbers is simply saying, and we can show how it's working. We can actually find empirical, observable information that will help us see if we're achieving our objectives. So, with that in mind, you've had a big day, day 4. You're halfway through. This is the halfway mark. Congratulations. It's time for a celebratory, dance, drink, high five, something like that. And I will see you again tomorrow.